Ghost Rider, Chapter 16, Tropical Storm. At 10 o'clock that night, Alex and Tamara were waiting on the edge of the rainforest, looking down the track towards the wooden cabins where the guards got washed and changed. Both of them were dressed in dark clothes. Tamara had picked one stone-colour chinos and a long-sleeved black t-shirt for Alex. He was too hot. The night had brought with it a clammy heat that clung to his skin, and he could feel the sweat snaking down his back. But this way there was less chance of being seen, and he was protected from the worst of the mosquitoes. Tamara was also in black. From somewhere she had produced a gun, a slim Beretta, which she was wearing in a holster under her arm. She also had a radio transmitter with which she was planning to contact the CIA backup team. Although she was worried about the reception, the clouds were thick, obscuring the moon, and it looked as if it was going to rain. Getting a decent signal in the middle of a tropical storm wouldn't be easy. Alex was glad she was with him. He had been alone too long, and it seemed to him that the two of them were well suited. Tamara had told him that she was one of the youngest agents working for Joe Biden. She had been recruited when she was just 19. She didn't look much older than that now. Crouched beside a giant flamboyant, the umbrella-shaped tree common to much of the Eastern Caribbean. He sensed that was one big adventure for her. Maybe that was the difference between them. She enjoyed her work. There were 3 cabins connected by covered walkways beside the track. They were fairly primitive, dark wooden planks for walls, roofs made from palm fronds. About 20 meters further down, Alex could make out the electric gate and the checkpoint guarding the launch area on the other side. There were 3 guards on constant patrol, one of them inside the control box. The other 2 sitting shuffling back and forth in front of the 10-meter high metal fence. The whole area was illuminated by a series of arc lights shining down from metal watchtowers. Alex could see hundreds of moths and mosquitoes dancing in the beams. The guards were relieved at 10:15 as Draven's personal assistant, Tamara, had been able to see the roster, and she knew that the second night watch would be arriving at any moment. Alex glanced back down the track in the direction. Alex glanced back at the track in the direction of Draven's house. He thought briefly of Paul. Presumably, he would have been told that Alex had drowned. A terrible accident. He wondered what Paul would be thinking, and he was sorry that Tamara hadn't seen him when she'd gone back to the house to fetch him some clothes. That's way much better. Fetch him some clothes. Sorry for the spoiler. But he didn't worry about that now. It was time. The track was empty, but there was no sign of any electric buggies coming either way. Tomorrow nudged him and he crept forward, keeping close. Tomorrow nudged him and crept forward, keeping close to the undergrowth, making his way to the first of the 3 cabins. Very carefully he opened the door. There had been no sound or movement for 20 minutes, but even so there could still be someone asleep in there. The cabin was empty. Alex slipped inside and found himself in a small rectangular space. There were a couple of old sofas, a fridge and a table with empty beer bottles, some pornographic magazines, and a desk of playing cards strewn across the surface. A fan stood in one corner, but it was switched off. The room reeked of stale cigarette smoke, and the air was sluggish and still. He passed through this cabin and into the next, an even smaller one with 4 shower cubicles and a row of wooden benches. The floor was tiled, damp towels hung on hooks. Again, there was nobody in sight. It was in the third cabin that he found what he was looking for. This was where the guards got changed for work. Uniforms, freshly ironed, hung in metal lockers. Polished boots were neatly lined up against the wall, exactly as Tamara had described. Alex couldn't help smiling to himself as he reached into his pocket and took out the bottle that Smith had given him. He glanced at the name on the label, Stingo, then opened it and sprinkled the contents over the guards' uniforms. The liquid was colourless, and didn't smell of anything. The guards wouldn't have any idea what was about to hit them. He heard a low whistle from outside, a warning from Tamara. There was a second door leading out of the cabin, and Alex slipped through it into the darkness. Outside he heard an approaching buggy. Perfect timing. It was the changing of the guard. As Alex rejoined Tamara, a buggy drew up, and 3 men dressed in baggy shorts and t-shirts got out. Alex recognised one of them. It was Colo, the driver who had left him to die. He was pleased. If anyone deserved to suffer, it was Colo. Is it going to work? Tamara whispered as the 3 men disappeared into the changing room. Don't worry, Alex replied. Smithers had never let me down. Has never let me down. About 5 minutes later, the 3 men reappeared, now dressed in their grey overalls. Alex and Tamara watched as they approached the checkpoint to swap places with the 3 guards there. They exchanged a few words in low voices. They took up their positions. The 3 who had been relieved went back into the cabin to change off and drove in the buggy. A few minutes later, Let's get closer, Alex whispered. He was keen to see whatever was going to happen. Colo was sitting in the control box in front of a bank of telephones and monitors. The windows was open so that he could communicate with the other 2, who were now armed and standing together in front of the fence. It was a thankless task. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Alex thought hanging around all night waiting for something to happen, and although none of them knew it, it was about to get worse. Alex noticed it first. The cloud of insects visible in the beams of the arc lamps had thickened. Before that, there had been hundreds of them. Now there were thousands. It was impossible to tell what kind of bugs they were. Beetles, flies, cockroaches, or mosquitoes. They were just black specks made up of frantical beating wings, antennae, and dangling legs. There were so many that the light was almost obliterated. Colo slapped his face. The sound was surprisingly loud in the thick heat of the night. One of the guards muttered something and scratched under his arm. Colo slapped his face a second time, then the back of his neck. The other man was beginning to shuffle around edgily and as if performing a weird dance. One ran the stock of his machine gun down his chest, then reached over his shoulder, using it to scratch his back. Inside the control box, Colo was swatting at the air in front of his face. He seemed to be having trouble breathing, and I could see why. The air all around him had been invaded by thousands and thousands of insects. Colo couldn't open his mouth without swallowing them. The mosquito lotion that Smithers had created was awesome. Every insect on the island had been attracted to the 3 unfortunate men. The two outside were out of control, slapping themselves, whimpering, jerking around like electric shock victims. Kola screamed. Alex could see a huge centipedes clinging to his neck. Very little of the man's skin was visible now. He was covered in a mass of biting, stinging insects. They were crawling into his eyes and up his nose. Still screaming, he punched himself frenziedly. The other two men were doing the same. There was a small explosion, a shower of sparks as one of the television monitors, invaded by insects, short-circuited. It was the final straw. Blind and swearing, Kola staggered to his feet and tumbled out of the control box. The other two guards fell onto him, clinging to him for support, and three of them began to grope their way towards the showers in the changing room. A huge cloud of insects followed them. Suddenly, everything was silent. "You were right," Tamara observed. "Your Mr. Smithers is pretty good. Your Mr. Smithers is pretty good." The two of them hurried past the now deserted checkpoint through the gate and along the track. On the other side, the rainforest soon ended, and they could make out the gantries with the rockets. Ahead, there was still no moon. Tamara looked up. "We're going to get wet," she announced. She was right. A few minutes later, the clouds opened, and they were instantly drenched. The rain was warm and fell from the sky as if poured from an enormous bucket. A sheet of lightning pulsed over the sea, reflected in the ground. That was being churned up all around them. Everything had become black and white. "What will happen to the launch?" Alex shouted. There was no longer any need to whisper. Tamara could hardly hear him against the crashing rain. She shook water out of her eyes and shouted back, "It won't make any difference. The rain won't last long. Everything will be dry by tomorrow morning." In fact, the storm couldn't have broken at a better time. The launch area was a quarter of a mile of completely open land, and Alex had wondered how they would cross it without being seen. He had no doubt that there would be any guards on patrol and probably CCTV. The rain provided perfect cover. In their dark clothes, he and Tamara were invisible. The second jetty was on the western point of the island, connected to the rocket gantries and the various control buildings by a white cement track. Alex and Tamara were jogging towards it when a light suddenly burst out, cutting through the rain. It was mounted on a boat that was heading towards the shore, fighting its way through the tumultuous waves. "This way!" Tamara yelled and pulled Alex towards a brick outbuilding with a tangle of metal pipes and doors outside. As they ran, she tripped. Alex managed to catch her before she fell, and a few moments later they were safely concealed behind a water tank. The jetty was right in front of them. Alex wondered if Draven was about to appear. The boat reached the jetty. The rain was coming down even more heavily, and it was difficult to see what was happening. Someone jumped down with a rope. More figures appeared on the deck. Alex had thought that Draven was planning his exit from the island, but it looked as if the boat had brought the new arrivals, people who didn't want to be seen. Alex heard a sound behind him and turned to see Magnus Payne and two guards drive down the track towards the boat. The ginger hair, the lifeless skin of the island's head of security was unmistakable, even in a tropical storm. They reached the jetty, and Payne got out. Four men climbed down from the boat. Alex grabbed hold of Tamara, shocked. He knew who the men were, even though he had never learned their real names. Combat jacket, spectacles, steel watch, and silver tooth. Force 3 had come to Flamingo Bay. But why? What did it mean? Magnus Payne was shaking their hands, welcoming them. This was the terrorist group that had sworn to destroy Draven. but they were being greeted like old friends. And then a voice crackled out of the storm, amplified by hidden speakers, echoing all around. "Do not fire! We know you are there. Drop your weapons and come out with your hands up." The 5 men froze. 2 of them pulled out guns, but the words weren't being addressed to them. If Alex had any doubts that it was he and Tamara who were being targeted, they were dispelled a few seconds later. 4 more buggies had come racing out of the rain. They slid to a halt facing him, their headlights dazzling him. A dozen black shadows came tumbling out and took up positions around them. Next time Tamara sensed, they then sprang into action, drawing her gun. There was a simple shot fired from one of the buggies. Tamara cried out. Her gun spun away. Blood began to seep from a wound in her shoulder, spreading rapidly down her sleeve. "That was your last warning," the voice boomed. "Stand up and move slowly forward. If you resist, you will be shot." How had they been found? I saw back and remembered Tamara stumbling. A drip wire. That had to be it. As they had run, she had triggered an alarm. Magnus Payne pushed his way through a line of guards. The 4 members of Force 3 followed. The whole area had been empty. Only minutes before. Now it was swarming. Tamara was clutching her wounded shoulder. I stood next to her, sick at heart. And then Nicole Draven appeared, dressed in a light raincoat and bizarrely holding a briefly colouring, engulfing umbrella that shielded him from the downpour. He seemed to relax, as if he'd simply decided to go for a late-night stroll. He stood in front of Tamara. There was very, very little emotion in his face. "Miss Knight," he said, and although he spoke softly, the words carried even above the sound of the rain. "I always did have my doubts about you, or rather I suspected the CIA would try to infiltrate my operation, and you seemed the most likely choice. How very sad I am to have my fears confirmed." The boy. Magnus Payne had reached Draven's side. "Yes, it seems your man didn't quite finish the job." Draven stepped forward until he was centimeters away from Alex. Alex didn't flinch. Rain streamed down his face. "Tell me, Alex," Draven asked. "I've been interested to know who you're working for. Is it MI6 or the CIA, or perhaps both?" "Go to the hell," Alex replied quietly. "I'm truly sorry that you chose to make yourself my enemy," Draven continued. I liked you from the start. So did Paul. But you abused my hospitality, Alex. A great mistake." Alex was silent. Next to him, Tamara had gone very pale. She had one hand clamped over her wound and was obviously in pain. But she was still different. "The CIA know we're here, Draven," she said. "You do anything to us, they're going to be crawling all over you. You're not getting away. You've got nowhere to go." Whatever made you think that I was planning to go anywhere? "Lock the girl up," he ordered. "I don't want to see her again." Magnus, bring Alex Rider to the main hangar. I want to talk to him. Draven turned and walked away. It only took 3 paces and he had disappeared into the rain. Chapter 17. Primary Target. The main hangar was huge. Perhaps this was where the Cessna was kept when it wasn't in use. The roof was a great curve of corrugated iron. One wall stood back to allow access to the launch site. There were various pieces of machinery and a few oil jobs scattered around, but otherwise the hangar was bare. Alex was tied to a wooden chair. Draven was sitting opposite him. Magnus Payne was standing beside him. His combat jacket, silver tooth, and spectacles and steel watch were grouped together. a short distance away. They had been invited to the party, but it was clear that Draven didn't expect them to join in. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had started. Alex could hear the water still gurgling in the gutters, and there were a few last drops pattering on the roof. The air in the hangar was warm and damp. He was soaked. Payne had used a length of electrical wire to bind him to the chair, and it was cutting into his flesh. His hands and feet were numb. Draven was wearing a light blue cashmere jersey and cords. He was relaxed, holding a giant brandy glass in one hand, 2 centimeters of pale golden liquid forming a perfect circle in the bottom. He raised it to his nose and sniffed appreciatively. This is a Lewis XIII cognac. XIII, well, I think it might be the Roman numerals. If it is, I can tell you what it means. Well, X means 10. I means 1, so X 10, so and I is 11, so we have 11. There's 3 I's, so 10 add 3 equals 13, so 13. 13 cognac. This is a Louis 13 cognac. He said, it's 30 years old. A single bottle costs thousands of pounds. It's the only cognac I drink. I knew you were rich, Alex said. I also knew you were greedy. I knew you were rich, and I also knew that you were greedy. Greedy. But I didn't know you were boring as well. There are 5 men who would be only too glad to deal with it if I were to allow it. Draven replied mildly. Perhaps you would do better to keep your mouth shut and listen to what I have to say. He swirled his brandy and took a sip. I have to confess, I'm fascinated by you. The grey eye studied Alex closer. Closely. When Agnes told me you were an MI6 agent, I laughed. I simply couldn't believe it. But when I looked back over everything that's happened, it makes perfect sense. I met Alan Blunt once and thought he was a most devious and unpleasant individual. Alan Blunt is pretty unpleasant, but I find it hard. This confirms my impression. Even so, I find it hard to accept that he sent you after me. Is that what happened, Alex? Were you planted from the very start? He'd been shot. Payne growled. I've seen copies of his hospital records. That was real enough. Then perhaps it was no more than an unhappy coincidence. Unhappy, that is, for you. But I'm glad we have this time together. Although I'm afraid that both you and Miss Knight must be dispensed with. At least I've been given the opportunity to explain myself to you. You see, Alex, I'd like to know about me. I'd like to tell him everything I'm about to tell you, but he's weak. He's not ready yet. He might even end up hating me for what I am. But you, and I will understand. Draven lowered his nose into the glass and breathed in deeply. I am, as you mentioned just now, a rich man. One of the richest men on the planet. I employ a team of accountants who work for me full-time all year round. Even they are unsure quite how much I'm worth of. You have no idea what it's like, Alex. I may even have anything you want. I can walk into a shop to buy a suit and decide instead to buy a shop. If I see a new car or ship or a plane in a magazine, it can be mine before the end of the day. At the last count, I have 11 houses around the world. I can sleep in a different country every day of the week. Wake up in yet another little bit of paradise. Of course, as you've been told, this wealth did not come to me in a way that you might describe as honest. Such terms are no interest to me. I am a criminal. I freely admit it. I have killed many people personally, and countless more have died as a result of my orders. Many of my associates are criminals. Why should this trouble me? This not successful businessman alive who has not had sometimes cheated or lied. We all do it. It's just a question of degree. I've been hugely successful for the past 20 years, and I fully intend to become richer and more successful in the years to come. However, Draven's face grew dark. About 18 months ago, I became aware of two small problems, and these have forced me into a particular course of action. There are the reasons why you are here now, Alex. There are problems that could all too easily destroy me, on which I have spent a great deal of time and money. And a great deal of time and money. Money. Seeking to overcome. Why are you telling me all this if you're planning to kill me, Alex asked. It is because I'm planning to kill you. That I can tell you, Draven replied. There will be no danger of repeating what you hear. But please don't interrupt again, Alex, or I shall have to ask Magnus to hurt you. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, he was fully composed. The first problem, he said, concerns the State Department of the United States, which decided to investigate some of my financial dealings, particularly those involving the Russian mafia. Of course, I am aware right from the start that they were building a case against me. I've always been a careful man. I avoid written evidence and make sure there are no witnesses who might incriminate me. But even so, it would not be possible to act on the scale that I do without leaving some trace of myself. And I knew that pieces, talking to anyone who'd ever met me, and that sooner or later they were planning to bring me to court. The obvious solution to this seemed to be to destroy the U.S. State Department, and in particular the men and women whose jobs it had been to meddle in my affairs. It occurred to me that in one respect they were being quite helpful. They had gathered all the evidence together, a case of putting all their eggs in one basket with a single well-aimed missile. I I could kill all the investigators and destroy all the tapes. Files, scraps of paper, telephone records, computer, printouts, everything. I could begin again with a completely clean sheet. The more I thought about it, the more grateful I became to the Americans for what they were doing. Of course, it wasn't going to be easy, because you see, the investigation was based in one of the most secure buildings in the world, the Pentagon in Washington. The place is nothing more than a huge slab of concrete, much of it underground, employs an anti-terrorist force that operates 24 hours a day. Even for a monitoring device you can imagine can be found there since 9 out of 11. No commercial plane can get anywhere near it. The Pentagon is thoroughly protected against chemical, biological, and radiological attack. I know, because I consider them all. But even a brief examination showed me that any such approach was doomed to failure. And now, if you'll permit me, I'll move on to the second problem that I mentioned. It may seem completely unrelated to the first. For a long time, I thought it was. But you'll see in a minute how it all connects. Alex said nothing. He was aware of Magnus' pain and the men who made up Force 3 watching him. He was still wondering how they fitted into all this. And where was Casper, the man with the tattooed skull? Even now, nothing quite added up. Alex shifted in the chair, trying to get some feelings back into his hands and feet. My other problem was Archangel, Draven went on. Space tourism had always interested me, Alex, and when the British government approached me to go into partnership with them, I must confess I was flattered. I would benefit from the money. They would put in the project for the money they would put in. I would be at the forefront of one of the most challenging and potential profitable enterprises of the 21st century, and it would provide me with the one thing I most needed, was respectability. The Americans might view me as a criminal, but I would give them pause for thought when they saw that I was having supper with the Queen. It occurred to me that they might find it rather more difficult to drag me off to prison when I was Sir Nicole Draven, or even Lord Draven. Sometimes it helps to have the right contacts, and so I agreed to become partners with the government in the Archangel project, the world's first space hotel. It's above us right now. It's always above us, and I can never forget it. Because you see, it has become a nightmare, a catastrophe. Even without the Americans and their investigation, Archangel could easily destroy me. Draven frowned and took out a large sip of brandy. Archangel is billions of pounds over budget. It's sucking me dry. Even with all my wealth, I can no longer support it. And it's all the fault of your stupid government. They can't make a decision without talking about it for months. They have committees and subcommittees, and when they do make a decision, it's always the wrong one. I should have known it from the start. Politicians have no experience of business. They know nothing. It's everything that the British government builds costs 10 times as much as it should, and doesn't even work. Archangel is the same. It's late, it's leaking, and it's a lost hope of everything being completed. The whole thing is falling apart, and for months now I've been thinking, if only the wretched thing would simply fall out of the sky, I could scrape back at least some of the money, because, like every major project is insured. More than that, I'd be able to wipe my hands off it. I'd be able to wake up without it having it, quite literally, hanging over my head. There were days when I was seriously considered paying someone to blow it up. And that, Alex, is when I had my big idea. It's as I told you. 2 problems that came together with one single solution. Draven leaned forward, and Draven leant forward, and at last Alex saw quite clearly the madness in his eyes. I wonder how much you know about physics, Alex. Even as we sit here now, there are hundreds of objects orbiting above us in outer space. from small communication satellites to giant space stations such as the ISS and Mir before that. Have you ever wondered what keeps them there? What stops them from falling down? Well, the answer is a fairly simple equation consisting of their speed balanced against their distance from the Earth. You might be assumed to know that. Theoretically, it would be possible for a satellite to orbit the Earth just a few meters above your head, but it would have to go impossibly fast. Archangel is 300 miles away. It's therefore able to maintain its orbital velocity at just 17,500 miles per hour. But even so, every few months it has to be reboosted. The same was true for Mir when it was in the orbit, and for International Space Station now, every few months rockets, which are known as progress vehicles, have to push all these satellites back into space. Otherwise, they'd come crashing down. In fact, some of them do exactly that. The Russian space probe Mars 96 fell out of the sky on 17th of November 1996. All the pieces rained down across South America in April 2000. The second stage of the Delta rocket narrowly missed Cape Town. The world has been very lucky that so far there have been no major catastrophes. With almost 3/4 of the planet is water, there are no deserts and mountain ranges. There are huge deserts and mountain ranges. The chances of a piece of space junk hitting a populated area are relatively small. Even so, most astronomers would agree it's an accident waiting to happen. Are you finding this hard to follow? I'll make it easy for you. Imagine swinging a conker on a piece of string around your hand. If you slow down, the conker will fall and hit your hand. And there you have it. The conker is the space station. Your hand is the Earth. It doesn't take a great deal to cause one to crash into the other. And that's exactly what I intend to do. Tomorrow, when the Gabriel 7 blasts off, it'll be carrying a bomb which has been exactly timed, and which must be exactly positioned within Archangel. Everything has worked out on computers, and the program is locked in. If you look at the map, you will find that Washington is positioned at around 38 degrees north. The angle of inclination followed by Archangel its flight path is also orbits the Earth. It passes directly over Washington. The bomb will go off 2 hours after Gabriel 7 has docked with Archangel at exactly 4:30. This will have the effect of knocking Archangel out of its orbit. The space station will begin to topple towards Earth. It will enter the Earth's atmosphere, drag, and after that things will begin to happen very quickly. The more atmosphere that surrounds it, the faster it will fall. Soon, it will be tumbling out of control. Oh, that is how it will seem. In fact, I have secretly programmed what are known as deorbit maneuvers onto Archangel. Although it would seem to be moving haphazardly, it will be as accurate as an independent targeted nuclear missile. Can you imagine it, Alex? Archangel weighs about 700 tons, of course. Much of it will burn up as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, but I estimate that 60% of it will survive. That's about 400 tons of molten steel, glass, beryllium, and aluminium, travelling at around 15,000 miles an hour. And that's very fast, actually. About 15,000 miles an hour. The Pentagon is the primary target. The building will be destroyed. All the people working there will die. And every last scrape of this information will be incinerated. I will suspect that the shockwave will destroy most of Washington too. The Capitol, the White House, the very monuments, the parks. A shame, because I've always thought it as a rather attractive city. but the very little of it will be left. And he closed his eyes. Jack Starboy was in Washington, visiting her parents. Maybe she would survive the hideous explosion that Draven had planned, but thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, would not. Once again, and again, I found himself wondering how he had got himself into this. Had it all begun with the doctor ordering him 2 weeks R&R? And now, I must tell you about Force 3. Doing such, you don't need to. And this replied, he'll work his part out for himself. You need someone to take the blame. Force 3 don't exist. You invented them. Exactly. Draven waved the glass to the 4 men standing by. I consider Force 3 to be the most brilliant aspect of the entire operation. Obviously, if Archangel is sabotaged, if it falls on the Pentagon, I will be the main suspect. So, I had to create a scapegoat. I had to make sure that I was above suspicion. I created Force 3. I hired the men, you see. Here now. And my instructions, they committed several acts of terrorism that seemed to be directed against capital concerns. They blew up a car manufacturing plant in Dakota, a factory in Japan, a GM research center in New Zealand. I also paid a journalist working in Berlin and a lecturer in London to speak out against Force 3 to warn the world about them. I then promptly had them murdered. Do you see? I was creating the illusion of a ruthless group of eco warriors who hated anyone involved in big business, and who particularly hated me. You kidnapped your own son, I exclaimed. At the last events at the hospital and Hornchurch Towers were beginning to make sense. I told you I had to be seen to above suspicion. The world had to believe that Force 3 were my enemy. What sort of father would allow his own son to be kidnapped just days after an operation? But they got it wrong, I interrupted. They took me instead of him. And he thought back to the time where they had been held prisoner on his head. So they were going to cut off Paul's fingers. Do you really order them to do that? Of course. For the first time, Draven looked troubled. I could see he was struggling with this. Imagine falling them down. The threat had to be credible. If Paul had been maimed, nobody would have suspected them that I had anything to do with it. And then Force 3 attacked me here on Flamingo Bay. I would be the victim. That's monstrous. Alex protested. He's your son. Maybe a little pain would have toughened him up, Draven retorted. The boy is too soft, and one day he's going to be in her billions. Her whole world will be his. Is one little finger too much to ask in return? Must be great having you as a dad. I sneered. You'll die painfully if you continue to speak to me in that way. Jane finished his brandy. It was suddenly flushed out of breath. The only mistake the only mistake I made was not provide Casper with a photograph of Paul. We knew his room number. We knew there would be no security at the hospital. How could we know that another boy, you, would decide to get involved? Is that why you tried to kill me in the fire? And he said, No. Draven shook his head. We needed you alive. That was the whole point. Paul had been saved from his ordeal because we needed someone to tell the world. That was Force 3 behind the kidnap attempt. Killing you would have been no use to us at all. You were meant to escape. There was a chair in the room so that you could climb up through the ceiling and over the one into the corridor. The fire was deliberately started away from the stairwell so that you could get out of the building. But one of your people was waiting for me with a gun. Alex looked at the man who had shot the night receptionist at the hospital. He was gazing at Alex with watery eyes that was too small and too close to his broken nose. Joe was obviously hearing this for the first time. Is this true? He asked. He's lying, Combat Jack said. It was the first time he had spoken. I let him go, like you said. No one near him. I understood. He'd humiliated Combat Jacket. And the man had disobeyed orders to get his revenge. He was the one who was lying. It was obvious to everyone there. They could hear it in his voice. Draven shrugged. It makes no difference, he said. Combat Jacket, relax. You may be wondering why Force 3 had come to the island, Alex. It's because I have one last use for them. The launch is timed for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The bomb will go off at 4:30 in the afternoon. And as Archangel comes crashing down on Washington, a fight will break out here on Flamingo Bay. Intruders will have been discovered. My men will shoot to kill. And when the authorities will come calling and the investigation begins, I'll be able to give them the proof that Force 3 was responsible. You have described the men who kidnapped you, Alex. Try their bullet-ridden bodies will be on display. Now Silvertooth who spoke. Especially because the steel work is also good and easy. How are you going to fake that? He asked. Twin smiled. Who said I was going to fake it? The shatter of gunfire was so loud and so close that Alex nearly toppled over in the chair. The 4 fake terrorists didn't stand a chance. They were dead before they could react, blown off their feet onto the concrete floor. Alex twisted round. Magnus Payne was holding one of the mini Uzis. There was a dreadful smile on his face, and a cloud of smoke hovered around his hands. You're insane! Alex spat out the words without knowing what he was saying. You're never going to get away with it. They'll know it was you. They may well suspect it was me, but it's going to be almost impossible to prove, Draven retorted. I'm afraid I'm the victim in all this. But what about me and what about Tamara? If you kill us, the CIA will come after you. The CIA are already after me. What difference will a couple of bodies make? I'm afraid you and Miss Knight will be found on the beach, accidentally caught in the crossfire. Terrible shame, but not my fault. And what about Casper? Why had Alex thought of him? He was the one piece missing from this crazy jigsaw. The Force 3 had me looking for Draven all along, and then so had Casper. But where was he? Show him. Draven ordered. Magnus Payne put down the submachine gun. He reached out and took hold of his ginger hair. A wig. He pulled it off, then ripped at his skin. I should have recognized the latex. He had recently worn a similar disguise himself. He watched in dismay as the head of security seemed to tear his own face apart, and the dreadful tattoos appeared underneath. In just a few seconds, the magic trick was complete. Magnus Payne was gone. Casper stood at his place. The tattoos were rather painful and unpleasant, he commanded, but we had to create a terrorist leader. People would remember. I'd say we succeeded, wouldn't you? And he felt utterly defeated. He remembered it now, his first meeting with Payne on Flamingo Bay. The head of security had disguised his voice, of course, but even so, Alex had been sure he'd seen him somewhere before, and Payne had known immediately who he was. Both he and Paul had been in the buggy when Draven introduced them, and Payne was supposed to be meeting them both for the first time. But he had known immediately which was which. Of course he had recognized Alex. We'll arrange the bodies on the beach after the launch, Draven said to Casper, and we'll add the boy and the woman then. Put down his glass and stood up. Goodbye, Alex. I enjoyed meeting you very much. I'd like to get to know better, but I'm afraid we've reached the end. He took it as ring one last time, as if there was something he had forgotten to say. The man who pretended to be Force 3 and whose names all Alex would know only lay sprawled on the floor. Casper stepped forward and grabbed hold of the chair, and was helpless as his chair was tilted backwards, and he was dragged away. Chapter 18, Wind and Water. Casper drove Alex out around across the compound to a flat, rectangular building with barred windows and a door with steps leading around just below the level of the ground. Alex could no longer think of the other man as Magnus Payne. The Raven's head of security had been bothered to replace his wig or mask, and even in the darkness, the hideous map of the world still glowed livid on his skin. Alice wondered how much he had been paid to disfigure himself. Whatever the sum, it would probably cost him just as much one day to pay for the laser surgery to remove the tattoos. Alice had been untied from the wooden chair, but his hands were still bound. As they got out of the buggy, he tested the wire, attempting to find some slack. It seemed to him that even time he might be able to free himself, but not that it would do him much good. The building in front of him looked like a prison, and Casper knew he was capable of what he was capable of. He wasn't going to make any more mistakes. They went down the steps into a large area filled with electronic equipment, computers and workstations. A model of a space probe gleaming in steel with security spinning everywhere took up most of the room. Alex noticed two sets of what looked like tracksuits hanging on the rail. They both had the Archangel logo stitched on the sleeve, onto the sleeve. He supposed they must have been the outfits worn by astronauts. "This way," Casper grunted. He gestured with his gun towards another flight of stairs leading down. Alex obeyed and found himself in a wide corridor with two solid-looking cages on either side. As he stepped forward, he heard a screeching and jabbering from the first cage, and to his surprise, an orangutan bounded towards him, crashing its fists against the bars. Then he remembered. Draven said he was planning to send an ape into space, some sort of endurance experiment. Casper said, Meet Arthur. Casper said. There was an ugly smile on his face. Is he any relation? I asked. The man remained a sharp jab with a gun, but the pain was quickly forgotten. He had looked into the next cage and seen Tamara Knight, still very pale but alive. He smiled at Ace but said nothing while Casper opened the door of the cage opposite. "In here," he ordered. Alex had no choice. He stepped inside and waited while Casper locked the door behind him. He looked around. The cage was about 2 meters square. The bars were solid steel. The lock was brand new. Alex had no gadgets on him, and his hands were still tied. He was going nowhere. Casper removed the key and slipped it into his pocket. "I'll leave the three of you together." He glanced at his watch. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. "You'll hear the rocket launch," he said. "And as soon as it's gone, someone will come for you. They'll take you to the beach, and that'll be the end." The corner of West Africa twisted in a grimace of pure hatred. Alex had seen it all. The bigger criminals, and the more they resented being beaten by a teenager. And Alex had beaten Casper twice. "I'm just sorry I won't be the one holding the gun," Casper went on, "but I'll be thinking of you. I hope it won't be too quick." He walked away. Alex heard his footsteps on the stairs. The main door opened and closed. Arthur, the orangutan, stalked to the back of his cage and sat down. "Charming guy," Tamara muttered. "Tamara, are you okay?" I should be worried about her, and he was relieved to see her now. I've been better," he admitted. "Was that Magnus Payne just now?" Alex nodded. "I thought I recognised his voice. What happened to his head?" Alex told her. He had also told her about his meeting in the hangar on Jones' plan to destroy Washington. Tamara was leaning against the door of her case, listening closely. When he finished talking, she let out a deep sigh. It seemed that Alex had even more colour had drained from her face. "We thought he was going to cut and run," she said. "We thought he was finished. We'd never figured he was going to come up with something like this." "Can you really do it?" Alex asked. To herself for a moment, they nodded. "Maybe, I don't know. You'd have to work everything out right down to the last second, the explosion, and all the rest of it. But yes, I'm afraid he probably can. We'll have to contact Joe Bryan. The guards took my radio transmitter. I imagine they'll have taken your iPod too." "What about the phones?" "There are radio phones on the island, but Draven will have disabled them just in case. And ordinary mobiles are no good. You can't get a signal. I don't know, Alex. Either way, we're going to have to stop him ourselves. One of us is going to go for help." "Barbados," It's only about 10 miles from here. Ed Shulsky is waiting at Harrison Point. He's got plenty of backup. Maybe he could steal a boat. Why me? Why not both of us? Tamara shook her. Why me? Why not both of us? Tamara shook her head. I'm sorry, Alex, but I've got a bullet in my shoulder. I'd only slow you down. And Alex lashed out the cage with his foot. The boss better. It was obvious to him that he wasn't going anywhere when he said so. Maybe I can help you, Tamara said. She was wearing trainers and Alex watched. He reached down and pulled out the laces. Catch! She slipped her uninjured arm between the bars of the cage and threw the laces over to Alex. What? You're not the only one with gadgets. There's tungsten wire in the laces. Diamond edged. You can cut through the bars. That's neat, he said. Secretly, he wished that the CIA had come up with something less clumsy and perhaps a little more efficient. They removed my exploding earrings, Tamara added, as if reading his mind. I took one of the laces and examined the door. The steel bars were strong, but they were thin, and he would only have to cut through three of them to squeeze through. His job would be made easy by the fact that his hands were tied, but perhaps he could deal with that too. How much time do we have? He asked. Not much. It gets light around 6, and if you're not out by then, I don't think you'll have much chance. Right. Alex looped the lace over the wire between his wrists, then grabbed the dangling ends with his teeth. He pulled the lace tight and began to jerk. His hands went into a raw, soaring motion. In less than a minute, his wrists were free. He saw Tamara smile. Now she would begin work in earnest. The bars weren't so easy. It took well over half an hour to make the first cut, and Alex was disappointed to discover that even after it had been severed near its base, the bar wouldn't bend. He had to make a second cut. Another half an hour was work before he finally fell to the floor with a clang. Alex cursed himself. If there were any guards upstairs, the noise would have alerted them, but he was lucky. Nobody came. It seemed that the two of them were on their own. Tamara hadn't spoken while he was going, but now she nodded to him. Keep going, she encouraged. What time is it? I don't know. They took my watch. That was the worst of it. As I started on the second bar, he had no idea how much time had passed. All he knew that he was worn out, he needed sleep, and he had blisters on his thumbs, his fingers, and his heels of his hands where they had rubbed together. The night dragged on. He sat hunched up in the cage, soaring back and forth. Tamara was watching him. The orangutan had turned his back on both of them and seemed to be asleep. At last it was done. The third bar came loose, leaving enough space for Alex to slip through the corridor. He went over to Tamara. I'm going to get you out, he said. No, Alex, I can't leave you here. Tamara shook her head. You didn't have a lot of time. Get to Barbados. Find Ed. She leaned back, although she was trying not to show it. Alex could see that she was in a lot of pain. I'll be all right, he went on. I've got Arthur to keep me company. Now go, before someone comes. Alex knew she was right. He picked up one of the loose bars and climbed back up the stairs. Looking through the window, he was alarmed to see streaks of pink light stealing across the inky sky. It must be well after 6 o'clock, less than 3 hours to launch. He went over to the door and opened it a crack. There was a guy sitting in a chair, wearing grey overalls and a cap. Alex smiled to himself. For once luck was on his side. The man was fast asleep. He gripped the metal bar more tightly. He had thought it might come in useful. 10 minutes later, dressed in the guard's uniform, and with his cap pulled down low over his forehead, Alex drove an electric body back towards the checkpoint. Without slowing down, he yelled out the guard's ID, angling his arm so that it covered most of his face. He was prepared to crash through the gate if he had to, and he was relieved when it opened to let him pass. It seemed that security on Flamingo Bay needed a serious overhaul. But then again, he and Tamara were supposed to be locked up. The place was an island, 10 miles away from the nearest land. What was there for Draven or anything else to worry about? The buggy was easy to drive, with only 2 pedals, accelerator and a brake, and no gears. He put his foot down and sped through the rainforest where the sky was getting lighter all the time. Draven's house and the far end of the island, Little Point, appeared in the distance. Alex turned the wheel and spun off the track, setting the boat down between the palm trees towards the beach. It made it about halfway before it got stuck in the sand. That was good enough for Alex. He jumped out and ran to the jetty. There were 2 canoes and a boat moored there. A Princess V55 motor cruiser. A canoe would be too slow, but the boat, it was a beautiful craft, very low in the water. Its bow shaped like a knife, built for speed. Alice looked for the key in the ignition. Why not? One guard had been asleep, another hadn't even looked at him as he drove past. A third might have made the clumsiest mistake of all. But this time he was disappointed. There was no key. He searched all the cupboards and lockers in the main cabin. There was nothing. Frustrated, Alex pressed his hand to sing on the wheel, forced himself to think calmly. Draven's house was in sight. He was tempted to steal in, try to get hold of the telephone, but Tamara had warned him that all the phones at the island would be disabled, and Alex believed her. Might he find a key to the princess in the house? It was possible, but the risk was too great. Alex looked up. The sky was brightening rapidly, the darkness trickling away like spilt ink. Dawn had broken. Draven might wake up at any moment. No phones, no boats. Barbados was 10 miles away, too far to swim or to paddle in a canoe. Alex knew what he had to do. He had worked it out when he was sawing through the bars of the cage. But he hoped he would be able to find another way. But there was no other way. He might as well get on with it. He jumped down from the boat and ran along the beach, making for the house. But he wasn't going in. Instead, he went round the back to the equipment. Saw where Cody had taken him before the dive. He cured Alex that he might find a key to the motel somewhere inside, but he wasn't going to waste any more time looking. The store was where Paul Draven kept his power kite and board. That was where Alex had come for. But even as he found the kite and began bundle it out, he wondered if it would be possible. 10 miles was a long way, and after a storm the sea might be rough. At least there was a strong breeze. Alex had felt it when he was on the jetty. It was also blowing offshore. More kite boarders avoided an offshore wind. It's lumpy and difficult, and there's also always a danger it will blow you out to sea. That was exactly what Alex wanted. He needed to get away fast. He reached for the board, and at that moment the doors swung open behind him. Alex was prepared to sprint around his fist ready, preparing for a cardi check, when Paul stepped inside. Alex? The other boy had obviously only just got up. He was wearing shorts and nothing else. He said at Alex, shocked. What are you? He couldn't find the words. I thought you'd gone. I'm afraid not. Alex wasn't sure how important. He didn't know what to say. He was aware that the whole situation changed. Where did you go from now? What's happened to you, Portus? What are you doing here? Why are you dressed like that? Sorry, I said, I can't tell you. Yes, we wished for and found him. How did you know I was here? I couldn't sleep. I went to the window to get some air, and there you were on the beach. You have a key to the boat. Do you know where it is? No. All of a sudden, Paul was angry. They told me that you'd been sent here to spy on him. I said that couldn't be true, but he was sure of it. He said he had enemies in New York and they paid you to come here to make trouble. Did he tell me what he did to me? I got in. He was getting angry. It was Paul accusing him. But he knew nothing. He said he put you on the plane out of here. Paul looked at uncertain. Is it true, Alex? He demanded, are you spying on us? We haven't got time to talk about this now. He took a step and Paul's arm shot out. He started reaching for the button built into the panel on the way. I just hadn't noticed before. This is an alarm, Paul ordered. If I press it, there'll be a dozen guards here in less than a minute. Why don't you tell me the truth? What are you doing here? What's been happening? If you press that button, I'll be killed. You're lying. Your father will kill me, Paul. He's already tried. No, Paul was telling me. And there was something else in his face. It wasn't just disbelief. It was anger. I just understood there was nothing he would say. He could tell Paul everything he knew about Draven. It would make no difference. Draven had lied to him. He had taunted him and showed him a little affection, but he was still Paul's father. It was simple as that. No matter what the feeling between them, Paul would defend him, because he was Draven's son. I knew that second before Paul sounded the arm, raised some palm upwards, and didn't know harm. Okay, Paul, he said, I'll tell you everything. Don't come any closer. Paul's hand hovered suddenly from the arm. I faced another step forward. It's not what you think. Your dad was wrong about me, so I am you. Your mother asked me to come in. What? Alex admitted his Paul's mother, because he knew the effect it would have. Paul froze, uncertain, and split second. I slashed out, driving his elbow into the other boy's temple. Paul crumbled instantly. I caught him and lowered him to the ground. He'd been learning karate since he was 6 years old. This was the first time he had struck anyone the same way as him. So he felt ashamed. As Paul had ever wanted him as a friend, someone he could look up to, and it had come to this. What else could he do? He had to leave the island. He had to prevent a whole city from being destroyed. He forced himself to ignore the unconscious boy, picked up the kite and rested off the equipment and dragged it to the beach. The sun was already well above the horizon. I pumped up the kite and laid it out along the shore, all the while looking out for any approaching guards. How long would it have been before Paul came around? 15 minutes, perhaps 20? No matter which way he looked at, he was running out of time, and there was still the problem of launching the kite. With two people, it had been easy. On his own, it would take more time. Alex stripped off the grey uniform. Underneath, he was wearing swimming trunks. He picked up the harness and clipped it on. It was a Mystic Dark Rider, made out of black rubber with a foam shell. Paul had chosen all the equipment himself, and he'd made sure he'd got the best. If only he could have been here to help Alex with it. How to do it? Alex checked the wind direction and laid the kite out off the grey uniform. Underneath, he was wearing swimming trunks. He picked up the harness and clipped it on. It was a Mystic Dark Rider, made out of black rubber with a foam shell. Paul had chosen all the equipment himself, and he'd made sure he'd got the best. If only he could have been here to help Alex with it. How to do it? Alex checked the wind direction and laid the kite out on the ground, with the line stretching towards the water's edge. He scooped up several handfuls of sand and dumped them on the upwind of the tip of the kite. The other tip he left free. He picked up the board and control bar and began to walk backwards into the sea. The water was surprisingly cold, lapped around his ankles. The kite, shaped like a crescent moon, was lying flat behind him. It was already flapping like a wounded animal trying to rise up into the air. Only the sand was holding it down. Alice laid the board down beside him and pulled it out of the lines to attach the downwind tip, gently nudging into the breeze. Almost at once it began to rise, and the kite inflated, the wind rushing through the vents. I stepped deeper into the water. The kite was pulling more strongly, the fabric jerking, throwing off the sun, and then suddenly it rose. I slid it carefully into the air and neutralized it above his head. It had taken him 7 minutes to get to this point, and he was painfully aware of the time to get taken away. But he had done it. He was ready to go. He hooked the control bar to his harness and then stepped onto the board. Carefully, he lowered the kite into the wind. Almost at once he felt the pull fierce and irresistible. He leaned back, letting it take him away. He was powered up. A moment later, he was away. The kite was flying in front of him, above 15 meters away above the sea. Despite everything Alex experienced, the same acceleration that he had felt with Paul, the two of them were falling around. He seemed to be going incredibly fast. The wind was rushing over him. The spray was almost blinding him, as if swept into his face. The sun was already hot. He could feel it beaten down, warming his chest, warming his arms, chest and shoulders. If he was out it too long, he would burn. But Alex knew that was the least of his problems. Somehow he had to cover the 10 miles, and Draven would be coming after him very soon. He was heading past Little Point. Once around it, he would find himself in less friendly waters. He eased the control bar, raising it slightly to slow himself down, and pulled on the front lines. The headline land. He felt the larger difference. The waves were suddenly much larger. The view ahead was obstructed by solid blue walls that rose up with alarming speed and threatened to come crashing down on him. Suddenly he managed to climb them one after another, but his arms were taking most of the strain, were already aching, and when he did catch a brief glimpse of the horizon, there was nothing on it, not even so much as a speck. Barbados was still a long way away. 10 minutes passed. Ice was a good surfer, but this experience was very different with the kite. All his concentration was fixed on the soaring black and white flexifoil wing. If he allowed it to stray outside the wind envelope, he knew it would fall into the sea. He would come to an immediate halt, and it would be impossible to launch the kite. Again, he had to stay upright. If he was exhausted from lack of sleep, ignore it. Stay focused. Gritting his teeth, He willed himself on. The wind was coming at him sideways now, gusting at around 30 miles an hour. The spray was lashing into him. He wondered if he was going in the right direction and risked a glance behind him. Flamingo Bay was already small and distant. He figured that so long as he kept it over his left shoulder, he must be heading more or less straight. He looked back again and felt a sickly lurch in his stomach. He had to fight to keep his balance. He must have travelled at least 5 miles. He was sure of it, but there was still no sign of Barbados. And what's happened? He was being pursued. Paul must have come round and raised the alarm. Either that or someone had spotted a kite. And guess what had happened? The Princess V55 was knifing through the water, its sea form powering towards him. It was incredibly fast, moving at almost 39 knots, 45 miles an hour. It wouldn't take very long to catch up with him, and there was more to come. There were 2 small boats with it. As Alex risked another glance behind him, he saw them peel away from it, leaping ahead and rapidly closer to the distance between the Princess and him. They were brand new Bear 620 DC speedboats, finished made and shipped out to the Caribbean. They were 20 feet long, squat and mean-looking, with silver pulpit rails shaped like the nostrils of an angry bull. One was equipped with a single 150 horsepower Mercury Optimax saltwater outboard, and Alex knew that they had to be going almost twice as fast as him. They were less than a minute away. There was nothing he could do. His hands were clamped tight around the control bar, and he lowered the kite as much as he dared. Desperately trying to pick up speed, now he could hear the motors above the wind. More walls of water rose up in front of him. His legs trembled with strain as he fought his way over the waves. The boats flew along, carving through them. There were 2 men in each of them, one steering, the other holding a machine gun. They hadn't come to capture him and take him back. They were here to kill him. I heard the fist rattle of the machine gun, almost lost in the roar of the waves. He slammed the bar into his chest, staring the kite up. At the exact same time, he transferred his weight into the flat of the board, tensed himself, and jumped. Now he was in the air, 10 meters above the water. The bullets passed underneath him. The hang time seemed to stretch on forever. He was flying, his whole body tilting backwards, the soles of his feet towards the sky. The men in the speedways had been taken by surprise, thrown around by the sea. They were off balance, half blinded by the spray, unable to aim at a target high above their heads. For seconds, Alex was safe, but he couldn't defy gravity forever. Alex braced himself for the splashdown, trying to ignore the 2 boats, which were horribly close. He landed between them, bending his knee to absorb some of the impact, lowering the kite to maintain speed. He toppled over. If he toppled over, he would die. But while he remained standing, the men couldn't fire. There was so much of the risk that they would hit each other in the crossfire. And then I saw Barbados. He was there ahead of him, no bigger than 1 penny piece. If he could just survive just a few more minutes, he'd be all right. He was being pulled along between the 2 boats, all 3 of them doing the same speed. He was so close to the men that for the scream of the engines and the booming of the waves, he could be able to call out to them. He could sense his strength beginning to fail him. His arms were aching, all his muscles were straining. He could barely feel the board beneath his feet, and the boat on his left edged ahead, allowing the one on his right a clear line of fire. I saw the guards raise his machine gun, preparing to shoot. He was a sitting duck, skimming across the water, totally unprotected, just a couple of meters away from the man who was about to mow him down. And Alex did the only thing he could. Once again, he took to the air. This time he didn't jump as high. The man with the gun might think he'd miscalculated, but Alex knew exactly what he was doing. Everything depended on surprise. As he took off, he let go of the bar with one hand and reached down. There was a handle in the middle of the board, and he grabbed hold of it. He was hanging in the air, and the board fell away, coming free of his feet. Holding it tightly, Alex swung it beneath him like a club. The board slammed in the man's head. Alex knew that it was made of Kevlar, the same material that the SAS used for their body armor. For the man with a machine gun, it was like being hit with a slab of metal. He crumbled, but his finger was still on the trigger. I saw the muzzle flash, bullets tore into the deck of the boat, shattered the windscreen, and hit the driver. He jerked and fell forward. The boat went out of control. I slid the board back onto him and managed to get his feet into the straps a second before he hit the water. The bear 620 DC had an unconscious passenger and a dead driver slumped over the wheel. He performed a fantastic S-bend, veering first to the right, then back to the left, crossed the open expanse of water, and smashed at full speed into the other boat. I watched as the two craft collided. There was an explosion of splintering metal and fiberglass, and the second great boat was flipped into the air. For a brief moment, it seemed to hang there. I glimpsed the face of the terrified driver upside down, and he gazed at his own death. Then it pancaked down. There was a huge splash. It was over. I allowed the kite to drag him out of danger. He was suddenly alone, but not for long. The princess had been hanging back, waiting for the two-speed boats to finish their work. Now it surged forward, as well as the driver. It was carrying 3 guards armed with machine guns. The men had seen what was happened. They would be more careful. All they had to do was move into the range, and they would be able to cut him down. I didn't have the strength for another jump. Barbados was looming up in front of him, but as if taunting him, the wind had died down. He could feel himself losing speed. He put the kite as low as he dared, but it made no difference. There was nothing more he could do. He braced himself, waiting for the shatter of the guns, and seeing the agony that would follow. There was no explosion. His blast of smoke and burning petrol, and his toppled side was deafened. He wondered for the briefest moments of if he had been hit, then he plunged into the water. As fragments broke, black and fiberglass ricocheted away all around him like a swarm of bees. His hands no longer had the strength to hang on to the control bar. He was circled beneath the surface, twisting round and round. Broken, finished. He surfaced. The princess was on fire. There was no sign of his driver, no sign of the 3 armed men. The boat swerved, trailing black smoke, and began to slow down. Alex was choking. He coughed up water and twisted around. Another boat had appeared, some sort of naval vessel. There was a man standing in the bow, holding a bazooka. Alex recognized the blonde hair and chisel features of Ed Shelsky, the CIA agent he had met in New York. "Alex!" Shelsky called out. "You want a ride?" Alex was too weak to respond. His shoulders and face had been burnt by the sun, but he was shivering. The boat drew up alongside him, and he was pulled on board. There was a dozen men on the deck, all young and tough-looking. Someone produced a large towel and wrapped it around him. "We were watching the island," Shelsky told him. "We saw you coming, although we didn't know it was you at first. To be honest, we couldn't believe what we were seeing. I still don't believe it, so we came over to help." It was all the explanation Alex needed. "Draven has tomorrow night," he said. "She's a prisoner, and there's something you need to know." Just then it happened. A black night so bright that it seemed to blot out the sun, sucking the blue out of the sea, and the sky, turning the whole world white. A noise like an explosion, 10 times louder and more sustained, a shockwave that shivered across the water, sending across the water, sending new waves, and more sustained, a shockwave that shivered across the water, sending new waves punching into the side of the boat. The very air seemed to vibrate, and Alex felt a burst of pain in his both ears. He turned in time to see a silver pencil glancing into the sky, flames scorching out of his face, rising as if on a caution smoke. It was 10 miles away, tiny, but even so, Alex could sense its awesome power and majesty. He watched as it disappeared effortlessly, penetrating the atmosphere. It was too late. Gabriel 7 had been launched. The bomb that was going to bring Archangel crashing down onto Washington was on its way. Chapter 19. The Red Button. It sometimes seems to Alex that the whole universe was against him. Getting away from Flamingo Bay had almost killed him. It had been an exhausting struggle against time, the elements, and Draven's firepower. Now he was going back. It was the CIA agent, Shelsky, who had made it happen. "Alex, you know the place. I need you to tell me where they're holding Tamara. You can give me the layout of the island. Anyway, we don't have much time. You saw for yourself the rocket is on its way. And if what you've told me is true, it is." Alex felt a spurt of annoyance. Why should the American doubt, even for a moment, what he had said? But perhaps he was only 14. Shelsky noticed his reaction. "I'm sorry, that was out of line, but this plan of his Archangel Washington? He shook his head. It's beyond anything we could have imagined, and that's why we have to take him out right now. We don't have time to drop you off. But you're too late, Alex argued. Gabriel 7 has gone. What are you going to do? Shoot it down? Josie smiled. There's no need for that. All we have to do is find the red button. Alex looked puzzled. Self-destruct. If something went wrong with the launch, Draven would have to have a fallback. We'll be able to blow it up before it gets anywhere near Archangel. Alex was standing at the bow of the armor-plated Mark V Special Operations craft. The sleek, streamlined vessel used primarily to carry SEAL combat swimmers into operations. It was equipped with 7.62mm Gatling guns and Stinger missiles, and the dozen men had been drafted in from the Special Operations Force, fully armed and ready to invade the island. He was wearing combat clothes that were literally too big for him. Someone had found a spare set on board. Now he watched as the island drew closer. The familiar landmarks coming into focus. The stranger was deep inside. He knew that he would have wanted to come back. Even if Shulsky hadn't made any argument pointless, tomorrow night was waiting for him. Then there was poor Draven. I just wanted to explain himself. He still felt bad about what he'd done. 2 minutes, Shulsky called out. The men began to check their weapons and body armor. They were heading for the old wooden jetty near the house. Shulsky intended to approach the control center through the rainforest. It would mean a fourth march along the leather of the island. It would take longer. But after Alex had described the launch area, Shulsky had decided a frontal attack would be too risky. There was no shelter. They would be cut down the moment they left the boat. Shulsky rejoined at the bow. I want you to stay on board until the fighting's over. You know, what do you mean? I thought you wanted me to help. You have help, thanks to you. We know where we're going and we know what to do. And we know what we're going to do. But this is going to be a war, Alex. I can't afford to have my men worrying about you. Stay in the boat and stay out of sight. It was too late to argue. They had reached the jetty and Alex had to admit that Shulsky was right about one thing. This side of the island was deserted. If Draven had seen them coming, he had concentrated his forces around the launch site. But nobody so much as blinked as the boat drew up at the jetty. Alex watched the 13 Americans disembark. They stomped across the beach and disappeared through the palm trees. He still wished he'd gone with them. He had told them where to find tomorrow, but he would like to be the one to release her himself. He was left behind, forgotten. He could see Draven's house in the distance, sunlight sparkling off the windows. Someone had dumped some water skis and 2 tow ropes on the sand, but otherwise the beach was empty. The Cessna 195 was bobbing in the shallows, but there was no sign of the pilot. The Cessna. It hadn't been there when Alex had set off with the kite. He felt a sense of misgiving. If Draven knew that the Americans were on their way, he first thought they would be to save his own skin. Shulsky and his men had rushed off without stopping to think. They should have disabled the seaplane first. I looked around searching for a weapon or anything he used to do the job himself. The Americans had taken everything, and he had no doubt that the Gatling guns would be locked in their mounting positions. What else? Nothing. Just 2 canoes sitting peacefully beside the jetty. The water skiing equipment and Pelican watching him from a distant wooden post. Silence was broken by a rattle of machine gun fire, and the Pelican took off in fright. It had begun. Alex listened as the shooting intensified. There was an explosion, and a column of flame rose up briefly above the trees. A movement caught in his eye. A buggy was racing along the track. Alex glimpsed it between the palm trees. Then it broke out into the open, and he froze. The buggy was being driven by Nicole Draven. He was alone, and it assumed Draven would make for the seaplane, but he continued to the house. Maybe there was a safe plate there. Maybe he needed to pick up a few last things. Or perhaps he'd come back for Paul. I tried to work out what to do. He wished more than ever that Shulsky had taken him with him, or at least left one of his men behind. Moments later, he approached the house. I knew what he was making a mistake, but he had to see for himself what Draven was doing. Anyway, it was against his nature to sit there, sulking away in an American boat while the fighting continued all around him. He could smell burning. Black smoke was drifting across the forest. There was more gunfight. Ice hurried across the hot sand, knowing that he had arrived at the end game. The last moves were about to be played. He reached the side of a building and pressed himself against the wall. He was out of sight. The terrace where he had eaten breakfast with Draven, and Paul was directly above him. The wooden staircase curved up on the beach, and Alex was just considering whether he could risk climbing it to look at him through the window, when Draven appeared around the side of his chest and attached his case in one hand and an automatic pistol in the other. His eyes stopped. "Ice right!" he exclaimed. His eyes were curiously empty. In the last few hours, he seemed to have strong. "Why did you come back?" I shrugged. "I've got to say thanks for having me. We had to see one last time. I wonder what it was that it brought you and me together. Was it fate? Was it destiny? I think it was Anne Blunt and my six. Well, they failed. Gabriel 7 will reach Archangel. It can't be stopped. The bomb will explode and Washington will be destroyed. Along with the evidence against me. They don't need any evidence against you now," I said. "They all know you're mad. Yes, it will be necessary for me to disappear, but it will be easy. A man with my wealth, with my contacts. The world's too small for someone like you to hide. We'll see." Draven raised the gun, but the one thing is certain, we won't meet again. He fired. Ice had been ready for it. He dived down onto the sand. He felt the first hail of bullets pass headways over his head. I knew there was no way he could avoid the second. Draven groaned. It was the most terrible sound Ice had ever heard. An animal cry that seemed to have come from the very depths of a man's soul. He looked up, brushing his hand over his eyes. He saw Draven standing there, quite limp. His eyes stared, then he looked behind him. Poor Draven had come out of the house. He must have heard them talking and walked around the side of the building just as Draven was fired. Ice had dived out of the way, but Paul hadn't been so lucky. He had taken the full impact of the bullets. He was lying on his back, arms and legs spread wide, blood soaking the sand. "You!" Draven screamed a single word. Then he began to babble, not in English but Russian. His face was white, twisting in pain and hatred. Tears were seeping out of the corners of his eyes. He pointed a gun at Ice once more, but this time Ice was ready for him. Before Draven pulled the trigger, Ice began to roll, spinning over and over, propelling himself towards the house. Bullets kicked up the sand and slammed in the nearest wall. But Draven had been caught by surprise. Still rolling, Ice disappeared into the crawl space under the house. It was cold and damp here. There might be spiders or scorpions nestling in the foundations, but he was in the dark, out of range of the bullets. For a moment he was safe. Draven hardly noticed. He fired at the house until the gun clicked uselessly in his hand. Taking a part of the city, he ran out of bullets. When the class, he threw the gun down and staggered over to his son. Paul wasn't moving. In the distance, he heard shouting. A buggy was approaching. The reinforced then turned around across the beach towards the waiting plane. Lying on his stomach, Ice looked out through the gap between the bottom of his house and sand. He saw Draven reach the water's edge and knew that he wasn't coming back. Slowly dreading it, he was going to find. He crawled back out in the open and went over to Paul. There was a lot of blood. Ice was certain that the boy was dead, and he was overwhelmed by a feeling of sadness and guilt. But then, to his surprise, Paul opened his eyes. Ice went down beside him. Now he was looking closer. He could see that, but beneath the blood, the damage might not be so bad as he feared. Paul might have been shot in the shoulder and the arm, but the rest of the bullets must have passed over his head. "Ice," he whispered, "don't move." I said, "I'm really sorry, Paul. This is all my fault. I should never have come here." "No, I was wrong." Paul tried to speak, but the effort was too much. I heard the sound of the sea snow's engine. Turned around in time to see the plane moving away from the jetting. Draven was piloting. I could make out the crazed, distorted face behind the controls. At the same time, a buggy screeched to a halt in front of the house. And now Chelsea and two men jumped out. Alex was relieved to see that Tamara was with them, still pale but looking stronger than when she had last seen them. "Alex!" she called out, then stopped seeing Paul. Chelsea signaled and the two men sprinted over to the wounded boy, pulling out the medical packs and lay round. "What happened here?" he asked. "Draven," I said. "He had Paul instead of me." "How bad is it?" Chelsea addressed one of the two men. "I think he's okay. He's going to be okay," the man replied. I felt a surge of relief. He's lost blood, and we're going to have a helicopter him out as soon as possible, but he'll live. Chelsea turned to Alex. We've taken control of the island. Told him. Draven's men didn't put up much of a fight. "We've lost Draven." "Where is he?" Alex pointed. The seasonal 195 had reached full speed and was riding smoothly out of the water. Bizarrely, impossibly, two canoes had risen up behind it, and as if it followed it out of the sea and into the sky. "What the?" Chelsea began. It was the only time that Alex would be able to do what he had to, using the tow ropes from the water ski equipment. He tied the canoes to the seaplane floats. He thought about securing the sea snot to the jetty, but Draven would have spotted that. Probably had that the plane wouldn't be able to take off. He was disappointed. It was already high up. A bizarre sight with the two canoes dangling underneath it. Alex wondered if Draven hadn't even noticed. Well, whatever happened, It made the plane easier to spot. And when it landed with a big flash, the confusion might cause it to overturn. Then Draven made his last mistake. Alex would never know what was in the Russian's mind. Did he think his son was dead? Did he think Alex was to blame? Did he had decided to take revenge? The plane swung around and suddenly it was heading back towards him. With no warning, before there was even any sound, sand leapt up all around them. Alex realized that the drone was firing at them using a machine gun. Landed somewhere on the plane. The detonation came a moment later. Everyone dived for cover. The two male agents crouching on the injured boy, protecting him with their own bodies. Bullets smashed into the side of the house. Wood splintered and one of the great glass windows frosted and cascaded down. The plane roared overhead and continued towards the rainforest. The canoes bumped and twisted just behind them. The drone had missed them on the first pass. Rex knew that he wouldn't be so lucky on the second. He looked at Chelsea, wondering what the CIA agent was planning to do. They might be able to make it into the house. But what about Paul? Moving him too quickly would kill him. The plane began to turn. The canoes dipped down. Draven was directly over the forest. He had seen the canoes, so he had no idea how low they were. There were two trees so to one side. Alice watched with a shiver of horror. The canoes collided with the tracks and became stuck between them. Caught sideways on the plane, came to an abrupt halt, as if it had anchored itself in midair. There was a sound of breaking wood. The canoes had smashed, but so had the floats. In fact, the entire undercarriage of the plane had been torn away, and Draven was left sitting on thin air, surrounded by half a plane. One moment he had been flying forward, next he simply rotated 90 degrees and swooped vertically down towards the ground. There was a scream from what was left of the engine. The ceaseless propeller turned uselessly. Alex saw the plane disappear into the forest. There was a crash, and then seconds later a ball of flame. It leapt up into the sky, almost as if trying to escape from the devastation below. To resurgence and silence. What seemed like an eternity, Alex stared towards the crash site. A fire still raged among the trees, and he wondered if it was spread across the island. But even as he watched, the flames started to flicker and die down, to be replaced by a plume of smoke that rose up in the shape of a final exclamation mark. Draven was dead. There could be no doubt about that. I felt an immense awareness. It seemed to him that everything that had happened from the moment he met the curry Draven at the Waterfront Hotel in London somehow been leading to this moment. He thought back to the luxury of Neverglade, the go-kart race, the football match that had ended in murder, the flight to America. Draven had been a monster and he deserved to die. When it was no longer in any danger, Gabriel 7 and the bomb it was carrying would be blown up long before it reached Archangel. But Alex couldn't feel any sense of victory. He looked back at Paul Draven. Two angels were busy working on him, one of them wrapping pressure bandages around his wounds, while the other fed an IV needle into his arm. Paul's eyes was closed. Naturally, he had slipped into unconsciousness, and so he hadn't seen what had just happened. Alex turned back and watched some smoke spread through the air. Suddenly, he wanted to be far away from Flamingo Bay. He wanted to be with Jack. The two of them would take a plane home. It was finally over. He realized that El Sharky and Tamara was staring at him. What is it? He asked. The two CIA agents exchanged look, and Chelsea spoke. Wish you hadn't done that, she said. We wanted to have a word with Draven. I don't think he was planning to hang around for a chat. You may be right, Chelsea agreed, but you still need to speak to him. He paused. Remember the red button I was telling you about? I said yes. But it seems I was wrong. There isn't one. We can't blow up Gabriel 7. There's nothing we can do to stop it. What? Maxie's head spun. But you just said that you're in control of the island. There must be something you can do. Tamara shook her head. After the launch, Sharon locked down all the computer systems, he explained. He was the only one with the codes. It's not your fault, Alex. By the time we caught up with him, he probably would have been too late by now. But right now, Gabriel 7 is on its way. We can't communicate with it. We can't bring it back, and we can't divert it. It's going to dock with Archangel in less than 3 hours from now. The bomb is on time, and it's all going to happen exactly as Draven planned. So what are you going to do? Alex asked. Tamara didn't have the heart to say it. She glanced at Shocky. Alex, he said, I'm afraid we need your help. Chapter 20. Archangel. No, Alex said. No way, forget it. The answer is no. Let's go over this again, Shocky suggested. They were sitting in the control centre on the western stretch of Flamingo Bay. Alex had been driven there from Draven's house, and it was clear that Shoki's men were in command. Very little damage had been done. The guardhouse and the gate had been blown up. There was the explosion Alex had heard, but it seemed that Draven's men had surrendered quickly. None of them had known what Draven was really planning. They had been paid to help the launch a rocket into space. Draven never told them what the rocket actually contained. At least poor Draven was out of it. He had been flown to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Bridgetown on Barbados. Ice was relieved to hear that he was going to be all right. He had already been given blood, and the doctors were waiting for his condition to stabilize before he was flown to America. His mother was apparently on her way to see him. I just wondered if the two of them would ever meet again. Somehow he doubted it. Now there are just 4 people in the room, surrounded by computers, video screens, and the blinking lights of an electronic display board. A series of blueprints had been spread out on the overalls. Large conference tables, they showed the overalls decision of Archangel with the different models, a dozen of them, extending in every direction, up and down. It was like an enormously complicated toy. Alex was slumped in a chair, his face grim, still dressed in the borrowed combat clothes. Ed, Chelsea and Tamara and I were sitting opposite him. Tamara looked exhausted, grey with pain and fatigue. She accepted a shot of morphine, but nothing else. She wasn't leaving Alex until a decision had been made. The 4th person in the room was Professor Sing-Ju Chan, the man in charge of the Gabriel 7 launch. The flight director seemed a completely different person. He had lost his calm and self-possession and looked as if he was on the verge of a heart attack. His face was blue, and he was sweating profusely, tapping on his forehead with a large white handkerchief. Like everyone else, he claimed to know nothing about the bomb, nothing about Draven's real plans. Promise to cooperate, to do anything that CIA required, and for the time being, Shelsky with giving him the benefit of the doubt. But Alex wasn't so sure. The professor had been recruited by Draven. He had been in charge of the operation from the very start. Alex was certain he knew more than he was letting on. This is the situation, Shelsky said. Gabriel 7 with Archangel at 2:30 this afternoon is carrying a bomb which will go off at exactly 2 hours after that. He glanced at Alex. Draven told you that himself. Alex nodded. That's right. 4:30, that's what he said. And as I understand it, there are 3 docking ports at Archangel. Shelsky pointed to the diagram. 2 of them are positioned at the very centre here, but that's not where Gabriel 7 is heading. Because if the bomb blew up there, it would simply rip the whole space station apart. He reached out and tapped a section on the other side at the end of a long corridor. The Gabriel 7 will dock here, he explained. Right on the edge. Yes, the very edge, Singh agreed. Yes, the very edge, Singh agreed. I noticed that the professor's eyes were wide and unfocused. He was taking care not to look at anyone directly. That's how it was decided. That's what Mr. Draven insisted. The bomb must be inside the observation model, Chelsky said. And I guess it'll be in exactly the right position. Most of the force from the explosion will go outwards. It'll have the effect of a push in the wrong direction, propelling the entire space station back to Earth. He took a deep breath, and for a moment something like panic flashed in his eyes. The hell of it is, there's nothing we can do to stop it. We can't blow up Gabriel 7, and according to Professor Singh here, you can't access the computers to reprogram it. You can't. The white handkerchief was out again. Only Mr. Draven had the code. Only Mr. Draven. I've checked it. Alex, Tamara said. It's true. The entire system had been shut down. It will take us days, possibly even weeks, to hack into it. I know it sounds crazy, but that leaves us with just one option, Chelsea went on. We have to send somebody up to Archangel. Believe me, Alex, it's the only way. Someone has to find the bomb and neutralize it. By which I mean switch it off. And if that isn't possible, then I have to move it. I have to carry it to the middle of the space station and leave it there. That way the different effect. It'll destroy Archangel. All pieces are left will scatter and burn up in the outer atmosphere. He will destroy Archangel. Professor Singh whispered the words as if he couldn't believe what he had just said. I don't give a damn about Archangel, Professor. Shelsky almost shouted the words. My only concern is Washington. Move the bomb or switch it off. What difference does it make? Move the bomb or switch it off. What difference does it make? Alex asked. How's everyone going to get there? That's the whole point, Chelsea said. The Soyuz frigate is ready for launching. It was all set there to carry Arthur into space. He was, but there's no reason why I should carry you. Me? You really want to send me into outer space? Yes. I'm not an orangutan. I know, but you have to understand what we're talking about. It's not as complicated as you think. I mean, the rocket is as pretty simple as of machinery. It's just like a tank. It's not as if you have to control it or anything. That's all done from here. Chelsea gestured around the room. We still have to access the flight programs from Sawyer's frigate. The computers marked command. Tell the rocket what to do. Docking, the re-entry, everything. And those marked telemetry allow us to monitor the health and well-being of the passenger. You. Not me. There's no one else, Chelsea said. Alex could hear the disappointment. That's the whole point, Alex. We're adults. We're all too big. Professor Singh. Tell him. Singh nodded. It's true. We've planned to put Arthur the ape into space. So I made all the calculations personally. The launch, the approach, the docking, all of it. The first difference is the weight. The weight of the passenger. If the weight changes, then all the calculations have to change, and that it will take days. What makes you think I weigh the same? Professor's hands. You weigh almost the same. We can work within a margin. It's possible, but it's not just weight. It's the size. The capsule has been modified, and none of us would fit inside. Chelsea explained. There isn't enough room. You're the only one who can go. Alex, heaven knows I wouldn't ask you otherwise. But there is no other way. It has to be you. Alex's head was swimming. He hadn't slept for almost 30 hours. He wondered if this whole conversation wasn't some sort of hallucination. But how would I find the bomb? He asked. And if I didn't find it, how would I know where to put it? You put it here. Again, Chelsea pointed at one of the models in the diagram. This is the sleeping area. You pass through it on your way to Gabriel 7. It's the very heart of Archangel. This is where the bomb has to be when it blows up. I've gone over it with the professor, and he agrees if it happens here, Washington will be safe. I'm just meant to carry it from one place to another. It'll weigh nothing at all. Singh reminded him. You see, it's zero gravity. I felt weak. He wanted to argue, but he knew that nobody was listening. They had all made up their minds. Tomorrow reached out and took his hand. Alex! If I'd go if I could, she said. I'm just about small enough, and I guess I'd weigh the same as you. But I don't think I'd make it, not with this bullet wound. I thought most kids would give their right arm to go into outer space. I thought most kids would give their right arm to go out into outer space. Chelsea added unhelpfully. Have you ever dreamt about becoming an astronaut? No, I said. I've always wanted to be a train driver. Statistically, the Soyuz has an exactly reliability record. So statistically, the Soyuz has an excellent reliability record. Tamara says, I just remembered seeing her reading about space travel on Draven's plane. Hundreds of them have gone up, and there have only been a couple of hiccups. How long will it take to get there? Chelsea asked. As far as he was concerned, Ice had already agreed to go. He'll be launched along the plane of orbit, Professor Singh replied. Can't explain it all to you now, but he'll follow a trajectory that exactly matches the inclination of Archangel. 8 minutes to leave the Earth's atmosphere, and he'll be docking in less than 2 hours. And the Soyuz frigate is ready? Yes, sir, it's ready as now. That struck Alex as odd. Yeah, the second launch had been brought forward, but why had Draven been preparing to send the ape into space at all, just hours after Gabriel 7? His plan had worked. Archangel will have been destroyed. Soon after the second rocket arrived, not for the first time, Alex was aware there was something they didn't know. Something that everyone had overlooked, but his thoughts were in such confusion that he thought that he couldn't work out what it was. Tara was still holding his hands. I know it's too much to ask, he said. I know you don't want to do it. But believe me, we wouldn't ask you if there was another way. And you'll be saved. You'll make it back. I know you will. Suddenly everyone was silent. They were all looking at Alex. I thought it was a bomb that was closing in on Archangel even now. The space station plodding towards Washington, where Jim said 400 tons of it would survive. The shockwave would destroy most of the city. He had thought if Jack Starbright was somewhere in the middle of it all, visiting her parents, and he knew that, just like Arthur, he didn't have any choice. He nodded. Let's get you souped up, Chelsea said. And after that, things moved very quickly. For Alex, if it was as if his world had disintegrated. He was aware of bits and pieces, but nothing flowed. From the day he'd managed to get himself caught up with my secrets, he had often found it hard to believe what was happening to him, but this was something else again. He seemed to have lost any sense to his own identity. He was being swept along, out of control, edging closer and closer to something that filled him with more horror than he had ever known. He was made to shower and dress in the clothes that he had seen in a building where he and Tamara had been imprisoned. A white t-shirt and a blue tracksuit with the Archangel logo stitched onto the sleeve. Steel straps passed under his feet to hold the trousers in place. And there were 6 pockets fastened with zips. Suddenly he was surrounded by people he had never met, all of them giving him advice, preparing him for the terrible journey he was about to make. You need to watch out for what we call the breakaway phenomenon. This from a man in glasses with a hair on his neck, some sort of pathological. It's a feeling of euphoria. You may like it so much up there that you won't want to come down back. I somehow doubt it, I growled. We'll be attaching EKG and biosensor leads. We're going to give you an injection. She was holding. This was a blonde-haired woman in a white coat. She was holding a large high-millimeter syringe. This is Finnegan. It'll make you feel better. I feel fine. You'll almost certainly throw up when you reach zero gravity. What most astronauts do. Well, that's something you'll never see on Star Trek, I suppose. All right. You rolled up his sleeve. Not your arm, Alex. This goes in your butt. He wondered why they had given him a proper spacesuit. Why they hadn't given him a proper spacesuit. The sort of things that he'd just seen in old films of the moon landings. Things explained. You don't need it, Alex. Arthur also wouldn't have worn a spacesuit. He would be inside a sealed capsule. If there was a leak, it's true that you would need a spacesuit to protect you. But that's not going to happen. I promise you, trust me. Alex looked at the dark, blinking eyes behind the spectacles. He knew that Singh was integrating himself with the CIA, trying to persuade them that he had been innocent from the start. He was sure that Ed, Chelsea and Tamara would be watching him throughout the entire launch, but he still didn't trust the professor. He was certain there was something he was being told. They gave him a headset and radio and wired up his heart. It seemed impossible to Alex that anyone could go into space like this without months of training. Tamara never left his side trying to reassure him. A 14-year-old was more adaptable than an adult. A 40-year-old was more adaptable than an adult. He said it was going to be a bumpy ride, but he would come to it perfectly because he was young. Maybe Ed Shelsky would write. It would be something to talk about, and an experience he would never forget. And then he was in an electric buggy with Tamara and Professor Singh, feeling strange in his tracksuit, the material soft against his skin. The rocket was ahead of him. He looked at it, but didn't see it. It was as if the connection had been severed between his eyes and his brain. It was huge. The capsule that would carry him into space was at the very top of a silver tank, as tall as an office block, suspended between 2 gantries. Water was cascading down. Was it raining? No, the water seemed to be coming from the rocket. He could hear the metal creaking as if it needed a huge effort to keep it in place. There were clouds of white steam pouring out, boil off from the propellant. Alex saw a deep trench running from the pond. I saw a deep trench running from the launch pad towards the sea. He guessed it would carry the flames from the solid rocket booster. It seemed impossible to him that this oversized firework could actually rise up and carry him into space. In a lift, climbing higher and higher, still with Tamara and the professor, he could see the whole island. The sea was stretching out in amazing blue, and there was Barbados in the distance. He was still being given advice, so many words, but they didn't actually penetrate. They just fitted around him like moths. Do everything lightly, do everything slowly. Don't look directly at the sun, it'll blind you. Don't even look at the clouds around the earth. The sun reflects some parts of Archangel will be hot, some will be cold. There have been some problems with the air conditioning. You're going to feel strange. The moment your face becomes puffy or swells up. If your spine stretches, if you need to go to the toilet, it's all the same for astronauts. Your body has to adapt to zero gravity. Who was talking? Were they really being serious? Serious? How could anyone expect him to do this? You'll need to access the observation model of Gabriel 7 to get to the bomb. There's a hatch you saw it on the diagram. You move it to where Ed showed you, and then you bring it back into the Soyuz's re-entry model. Don't waste any time. We'll control everything from here. Free a descent and engage, and then Alice was inside. They had certainly been right about the amount of space. No adult would have been able to fit into it. He was lying on his back in a metal box that would have been some kind of complicated washing machine or water tank. He felt his feet in the air and his legs so tightly packed in that his knees were touching his chin. There were tiny windows on either side, but they were covered with some sort of material. He can see out of them. There were no controls, of course not. Arthur the orangutan wouldn't have needed the controls. Professor Singh was wiring him up one monitors. Now Alex was the one who was sweating. They had told him he would sweat even more when he was in outer space because of fluids moving up. The body salt concentration being upset. Alex tried to put it out of his mind. He didn't believe he would get there. He didn't think he would survive the journey. Tomorrow night leant over him. He was strapped into the seat. His stomach was clenched tight and he had difficulty drawing the air into his lungs. He could move his arms, but nothing else. He was too cramped and hadn't even started. Face was very close to his, filling his field with vision. Good luck, Alex, she whispered. Nothing more. She waved her hand with a finger crossed. You will hear the countdown, Professor Singh said. He was somewhere behind her. We have nothing to worry about, Alex. We will guide you through it all. You'll hear us over the radio. We'll look after you. They sealed the door. I saw the air inside the capsule compress. He swallowed, trying to clear his ears. Apart from the sound of his own breathing, everything was silent. He was alone. T-30. A crackle and hiss of static. The disembodied voices had come through the headset. What do they mean? 30 minutes until blast-off? In 30 minutes, time he would be leaving the planet? I tried to make himself more comfortable, but he couldn't move. How are you doing, Alex? It could have been Ed Shelsky. I didn't know. The voices echoed inside his head. They all sounded the same. T-minus 25. T-minus 20. He could only sit there, doubled up on himself. The countdown continued. The strange thing was, it felt that time had gone wrong too. A minute seemed like half an hour. Yeah, half an hour was passing in only in minutes. He concentrated on his breathing. T-minus 15. Inside the control room, Ed Shelsky was watching Singh and his team of 30 as they went through the final preparations. He walked over to the Professor. He was wearing a gun in a holster slung over his shirt. Don't mean to worry you right now, Professor. But I want you to know that if I doesn't come out of this in one piece, I'll personally rip your guts out. Of course, Singh smiles nervously. Nothing to worry about. He'll be fine. Tomorrow night sat motionless in the front of the observation window. Smoke was still rising from the rainforest where the season had crashed. There were no birds to be seen. The whole island seemed to be tensing itself for the moment. T-5. What happened to T-10? As of feeling 6. The injection he'd been given hadn't worked. He could hear something in the distance. Was it his imagination? Or something rumbling far below him? T-4. 3, 2, 1. It began. At first it was slow, and he felt shuddering roar to start with. But soon it was all consuming. The entire capsule was shaken. He wasn't sure if he was moving or not. There was a thud as the clamps holding down the rocket were automatically released. The shadows got worse. Now the whole capsule was riding so crazy that Ice could feel his teeth being shaken in his skull. The noise level had risen too. It was now a roar that pounded it at him with invisible fists, and lying on his back with his legs bent in front of him. And there was nothing he could do. He was defenseless, and still it got worse. He was definitely rising. He could feel the force of the rocket's thrust. He was being pushed into the seat. Not pushed, crushed. His vision had almost gone. His eyeballs were being mercilessly squeezed. He tried to open his mouth to scream, but all his muscles were locked. He felt as if his face was being pulled off. Then there was a deafening explosion, and he was slammed forward into his seat. His neck straining, the belt cutting into his chest. He was panicked, thinking it had all gone wrong. That part of the rocket had blown up at any moment now. He would be incinerated or set plummeting back to Earth. Did he really remember what he had been told? The first stage of the rocket had burnt out and had been ejected. That was what he had heard and felt. God help him. He really was on his way. From 0 to 17,500 miles an hour and 8 minutes. Everything had been calculated. There have been an ape inside the orbit or model. Instead there was a boy. To the computer, it made no difference. Exactly the right seconds the next station ignited. And once again he was thrown forward since the countdown had ended. Was he in outer space yet? It seemed to him that the shaking was more violent than ever. The whole capsule had become a distorted mass of jagged, flickering lines, like the image on a broken TV screen. He was at Max Q, sitting on 450 tons of explosive being rocketed through the sky at 25 times the speed of sound. The main engine was burning fuel at over 1,000 gallons a second. If Sawyers was going to blow up, it would happen now. He was on fire. Blinding light suddenly crashed into the capsule. A nuclear explosion. No, the fairings on the windows had come free. They weren't needed anymore. He was looking at the sun, which was streaming in, dazzling. Was that the blue sky or the sea? How much longer could his body stand the battering and receiving? It occurred that he had nothing in the world. No amount of training could have prepared him for an experience like this. The rocket stopped. That was what he felt like. Almost fell away, and I felt a quite different sensation. A sick, light-headed floating that told him he had in an instant become weightless. He was about to test it, but then the third stage kicked in, and once again he was prepared forward on his impossible fairground right. This time he closed his eyes, unable to take any more, so didn't see the moment when he broke through the onion peel of the Earth's atmosphere and went from blue to black. At last he opened his eyes. He wanted to stretch, but that was impossible. Alex looked out of the window and saw stars. Thousands of them, millions. Once again he had no sense of movement. Was he really weightless? He fumbled a hand over one of the pockets in his trousers and brought out a pencil. A few centimeters long, he let it go. The pencil floated in front of him. He stared at it. Before he knew what he was doing, he was laughing. He couldn't stop himself. It was like one of those cheap special effects in a Hollywood film. There was no hidden wires, no computer trickery. It was happening right before his eyes. Alex, how are you? Are you receiving me? His voice crackled in his ear. And the strange thing was that it sounded no different, no further away. Alex was almost 100 miles from the Earth's reception. Come fly, Alex replied. And there was a tone of wonderment in his voice. He had survived the launch. He was on his way. Congratulations! You've just broken a world record. You're the youngest person in space. He was in space. With the shock of the launch behind him, I tried to relax and enjoy the view. But the windows were too small and in the wrong place. The Earth was behind him and out of sight. But there were stars and the infinite blackness all around. How strange was it? this sense that he was going nowhere. That he sensed that he was going nowhere. The pencil was still in front of him. He just laid his finger and watched it spin. Round and round it went. Alex was hypnotized by it. Nothing else seemed to be moving. This wasn't a ride at all. He felt as if his entire life had stopped. And then he saw Archangel. At first he was aware of something shaped like a spider appearing in the periscope attached to the window inside the capsule. It looked like a star, but much brighter than others. Gradually it drew closer and became clear. An awesome construction with silver models and corridors interlocking, crisscrossing, hanging from what looked like the tower of a crane, with massive panels stretching out in every direction, absorbing the energy of the sun. It was huge. It weighed about almost 700. It weighed almost 700 tons. But it was floating effortlessly in the great emptiness of space. And I had to remind himself that every piece of it had been laboriously constructed on the Earth, and an engineering feat beyond anything he had ever imagined. Slowly, Archangel filled his vision. Both he and the space station were travelling at 70,500 miles per hour. So fast that it's travelling so fast. It's so fast that Alex, it made no sense at all. But he seemed to be going very slowly, and a booster rocket fired, and the Soyuz accelerated, moving in on the central docking port. It was the only way Alex could measure his progress through outer space. A few meters at a time, getting closer and closer. The rockets were controlled from Flamingo Bay, but they were accurate to a fraction of a millimeter. I saw the curving metal plates, the intricate plan that made up the space station. He saw a painted Union Jack and the words Archangel printed in grey. The last part of the journey seemed to take forever. The space station was swallowing him up, and he had to remind himself that if something went wrong now it would have the impact of a bus smashing into a wall. There was a single jolt, nothing compared to what he had felt earlier. That was it. The voice crackled in his headset. He thought he heard applause, unless it was already static. Whatever he was misgiving about professing, it seemed that flight director had been true to his word. Alex had arrived. Alex looked at his watch. Someone had given it to him when he got dressed for the launch. 3 o'clock. He had 1.5 hours to find the bomb and either turn it off or move it. But there was something wrong. For a second, Alex panicked. Had the oxygen supply stopped? He swallowed hard 3 or 4 times, gasped before. He could feel his heart hammering, and he was certain he was going to die. But it wasn't that. There was still air in the model. He had just absorbed him. Alex forced himself to calm down. What was it? Of course, the science. Nobody was talking to him. Either he was he was on the wrong side of the planet, out of range of the control center, or the radio had broken down. Silence was total, absolute. He had never felt more empty, more alone. But it didn't matter. He didn't need anyone to talk to him. He knew what he had to do. He unstrapped himself and reached for the circular hatch just above his head. It was his first experience of zero gravity. He knew at once that he had made a mess of it. He rose out of his seat far too quickly, and his head thudded into the metal wall, knocking him back down again. He ended up where he began, but with a bruised forehead and the taste of blood in his mouth. Bad start. Everything had been done slowly. He reached up again and found the handle. He pulled it out and turned it. The hat swung outwards. Alex braced himself. If there was any error, if the airlock wasn't secured, he would be exposed to the most lethal environment known to a man. He would die a most horrible death. The air would be sucked out of his lungs, and his blood would boil. All his internal organs would be seized up, and he would be ripped apart by the total vacuum of space. Try not to think about it. It wasn't going to happen. In less than 90 minutes, he would be on his way home. He found himself looking into a tunnel, about 70 meters wide and a couple of meters long. This was the entrance. They called it the node, between his capsule and the reception area of Archangel. reconditioned the air, cold and dry, blew into his face. He pushed up with his feet, the lightest movement possible. Effortlessly, he rose. It was like flying. It was just like he had seen in countless films. He was flying. The node led into the first model. Archangel had been built for tourists. It called itself a space hotel, but of course, it was a space station, very similar to Mir or the ISS, with very little room and every available inch crammed with cupboards, lockers, and all the wires, pipes, dials, gorgeous switches, circuits, and other essentials. You need to keep its inhabitants alive. Each section was a cylinder about the size of an ordinary caravan, lit with a harsh white light and jammed with equipment and handrails on 3 sides. There were more handrails and Velcro straps on the floor. Alex understood that to stop himself, for he would have to hook his hands or feet into the floor. He had expected the interior to be silent. Instead, he was aware of humming of the air conditioners. There were pumps circulating liquid coolants through the walls. The grinding of metal against metal, tons of it bolted together, even as the spun round in orbit. He breathed in deeply. The air was very dry. He wondered how it was produced. Did it come out of a bottle, or was there a machine? Alex floated, or tried to. Once again, he pushed too hard with his feet, and the entire chamber turned upside down and spun helplessly around, totally out of control. Despite the injection, he was suffering from what the NASA called space adaptation syndrome. In other words, he was about to throw up. He tried to steady himself. One of his hands caught the wall, setting him spinning the other way. He no longer knew what was up and what was down. He couldn't even see the capsule that had brought him here. He reached out and managed to hook a finger into one of the straps that slowed him, but the whole experience so far had been horrible. As had seen Star Wars, he'd watched the Millennium Falcon blast its way across the universe, and like millions of others, he'd bought into the dream. The reality was nothing like it. His body was sending his brain weird signals. He was sweating. The balance of his inner ear had gone. His bones no longer was leaking calcium. His back was aching because of the elongation of his spine. Inside his stomach, his guts were floating helplessly, and because of his shift in this fluid level, he felt a desperate need to go to the toilet, and it got worse. He stopped spinning and found himself floating in the very centre of the model. Either he was moving very slowly, or he wasn't moving at all. The rails and Velcro straps were now uselessly high above his head. He stretched out his arms and discovered that the walls were a couple of centimetres out of reach. It was like a terrible nightmare. Every time he strained forward, his body moved back. He was quite literally stranded, floating helplessly, going nowhere. What now? How did he make himself go up or down? He jerked his body and pedalled with his legs. It didn't help. He tried to wave his arms like a bird in a backyard to carry. Nothing. I started to panic. Nobody had warned him about this. He was stuck in zero gravity. He began to wonder if he wasn't doomed to remain like this until Archangel blew itself apart. He couldn't move. It took what seemed like an eternity to work it out. It was amazing, really, what a physics lesson on a damp Wednesday at Brooklyn School should suddenly come to mind and save his life. He took off his shoes and threw them with all his strength. The forward motion produced an opposite reaction, a bit like the recoil from a gun. Alex was thrown backwards and managed to grab hold of a handrail. He clung there for a moment, breathing heavily. It had been a nasty moment, and he would have to be careful it didn't happen again. He'd have to get moving. He hadn't been able to see the observation model and the remaining stages of Gabriel 7 on the far side of the space station, but he knew they were there. The rocket had docked automatically almost an hour ago and brought with it an activated bomb. He looked at his watch again. 25 minutes had passed. 25 minutes had passed! There was barely an hour left. If the bomb exploded at the right time and did the right place, he would be vaporized, and 100-ton missile would begin its deadly journey back to Earth. And he saw back to the map of Archangel. He had been shown and knew that he had to navigate his way through an interlocked series of models to reach his destination. He remembered what Chelsky had told him. Don't try to defuse it unless you're sure you know what you're doing, Alex. You press the wrong button, you'll be doing Draven's work for him. Just move it into the sleeping area. That's all you have to do. Move it and then get the hell out fast. It was ticking right now. Alex could imagine it, just the two of them, him and the bomb, on a space station orbiting the Earth. He was about to set off when he heard something declaring of the hatch closing. He was quite unmistakable. He stopped and listened. Nothing. What next? Martians? He must have imagined it. Alex pushed off with his feet as gently as possible, trying to steer himself towards the next model. Once again, he had pushed too hard. His shoulder hit the roof, or the floor, or the node. And for a second time, he found himself spinning out of control. He reached out his hands to steady himself, found himself holding a lever just out of the wall. It was a shatter release. Unable to control his curiosity, he hoped to wonder if he would give him a view of the Earth, but the station was facing the wrong way. Alex reeled back almost blind as a brilliant light burst into the model. Professor Sinks had warned him not to look directly into the sun. Even that brief instant, Alex had almost blinded himself. He lowered the shutter again and waited for his sight to return, then continued gently flying into the sleeping area. The bunks attached vertically to the wall with straps to keep the crew members or guests from drifting off. In space, you could sleep sideways, standing up, or upside down. Standing or upside down made no difference. There was a long, brightly lit corridor. Straight ahead, 4 or 5 models bolted together. Everything was white. This was the very heart of Archangel, with the dining room, the exercise room, the showers and lavatories, a living room, and two laboratories, and laid out next to one another. Gabriel 7 would have docked at the far end. Alex dumped himself, preparing to make the next leap. He leapt out with his palms of his hand and froze. A man had appeared in front of him, dressed in an identical suit to his own. The man was wearing a skull cap, but seeing Alex, he tore it off, revealing a mirror image of the world 300 miles below. Casper. Of course. Alex had forgotten about him. So had everyone else, but Professor must have known that Casper had been on board Gabriel 7. That was the one piece of information he had been keeping to himself. Why? Had he been so scared of Casper that he couldn't bring himself to reveal the whole truth? It looked as if Alex could never know. Casper had seen him. It was only 20 meters away at the end of the corridor. He hadn't spoken a word, but now, expertly as if he had been trained, he pushed forward, floating through the air towards him. He was confident in perfect control, and he was holding a knife. Chapter 21.